When people ask me what is a Bible verse that speaks deeply to me, the one verse that often comes to mind is Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, the Shema. Shema means hear, pay attention to, respond to. And it goes like this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise up. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Fix them as an emblem on your forehead. And write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Why does this speak so deeply to me? I think it's because it sums up what discipleship is all about. How are we to be as God's people? We are to love. We are to love God with all we have. We are to teach this love to our children. And we are to remind ourselves of God's love and our commitment to God every day. Well, actually, twice a day. This prayer given to the people through Moses was to be recited twice a day, in the morning and at night. And in some ways, this prayer is similar to the Lord's Prayer, meaning that it's a prayer that is to be recited over and over again until it becomes one with our souls. The Shema was taught to people just before they entered the Promised Land. For several Wednesdays here, Ben and I will focus on the Shema. But before we get into the Shema itself, we need to go back to the context of which this prayer was spoken and recited. As I said just a few minutes ago, this prayer was given to God and taught by Moses just before the people of God entered the Promised Land. Now, remember, after the people had been freed from slavery from the Egyptians, they'd been in Egypt, they wandered in the desert for 40 years. And now, in Deuteronomy 6, they are getting ready to enter. And for what is a whole other series, whole other topic, Moses is not going with them. In fact, at the end of Deuteronomy, he is taken up to heaven. And so this book contains the last message, the last teaching of Moses. So right before Moses goes into the Shema, he says this. This is chapter 6, 1 through 3. Now, this is the commandment, the statutes, and ordinances that the Lord your God has charged me to teach you, to observe in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy, so that you and your children and your children's children may fear the Lord your God all the days of your life, and keep all his decrees and his commandments that I'm commanding you today, so that your days may be long. Hear, therefore, O Israel, and observe them diligently, so it may go well with you, and so that you may multiply greatly in the land, flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has promised you. Now, something we should keep in mind when we hear this preamble to the Shema is that we who live in the United States live in a land that has been colonized. And so, therefore, the context of the Shema is crucial for our understanding of what is being said here. For what God intends by these words is the remembrance of God's liberating power. After the Shema, later in verse 20, Moses says this: "When your children ask you in a time to come, what is the meaning of the decrees, the statutes, the ordinances that God has commanded you?" When these questions are asked, the answer should center around the memory of when the Israelites were slaves in Egypt and how God delivered them. It is the memory of being liberated and freed from slavery that is central to the understanding of the God of whom they serve. This memory of being slaves ought to prevent them from enslaving others. Most of us in the U.S., we do not come from enslaved people. Or I should say, not most of us in the U.S., but most of us who attend Shalom do not come from enslaved people. Our ancestors, white Europeans, are the ones who did the enslaving. As Christians, we have our identity in God, the one who frees. This preamble of the Shema is a reminder that God is a liberating God. And we, who are God's people, ought to work towards the liberation of all people. So then when Moses says to us, love God with all of our soul and all of our might, and to remember it, it's not so much about God's love for me as an individual, but God's love for us, for humanity. Because true devotion to God implies that we stand where God stands and challenge all dignity denying behavior to all people in all places and in all times. Hear, O people of God, the Lord is our